Hey, welcome to Sanctus Young Adults Online, inviting young adults into God's redemptive story. My name is Josh. I'm the young adults pastor here at Sanctus Church. I hope that these conversations, these discussions, and these teachings will be meaningful and impactful to you. We should take a second to subscribe and to follow so that you never miss any content that we upload.
When it comes to faith in Jesus, it's not so much about how you start as it is about how you finish. It's not just about how you start, it's about how you finish. You can't just make a decision once and then go on living however you want, but it's actually about a daily decision every day. And often, our daily decisions feel like a fight. So it's not about where you begin, but it's about where you finish. And I think so many of us, we've seen people walk away from their faith throughout their lives. And oftentimes, I'll be honest, when I've had these conversations with people, it's not because of some intellectual idea and they've changed their mind. It's not because they've now adopted a new worldview and they're very sure of it. It's often because of relationships that have gone south in the church. Many times people have walked away from their faith not because of belief in God, but because of belief in the community of God. Many times these relationships also are romantic, and they're with significant others, and they're the places where we often experience deep hurt. And this was part of the inspiration for this new series of talks that we're doing in February called The Good Fight. For us as young adults, what so often derails our faith, stops us from following Jesus, is relationships that have not gone well. I hear so many stories of people who maybe once were in a relationship and now they're single and they're struggling to find someone and they're mad at God and they're frustrated at God. I've heard so many stories of couples who are struggling to stay pure, or they're having issues, or they're fighting, or whatever it is, and that brings them farther and farther away from Jesus. I've seen marriages falling apart. I've seen kids, many of you yourselves have experienced this, where marriages fall apart due to infidelity, due to mistakes, due to poor communication, and it ripples out into us. So the heart of this series is, would we as young adults, whether we're single, dating, engaged, married, would we be willing to fight the good fight for our faith and for each other's faiths? Because how we understand love and purity and contentment isn't just about us, but it's about the community. And if we want to follow Jesus, and if we want our friends to follow Jesus, then how we respond to love and purity and contentment in any season of life matters deeply. And that's my heart for us as a community. We're not going to allow the lies of the enemy to have space here. We're not going to let the temptations of this world have space here. And we're not going to bow to the temptations of our flesh either. We are going to build a community with a healthy understanding of love and purity and contentment. So here's how we're breaking this down. We're going to spend a couple weeks together in this series. Tonight, we're going to talk about love and purity. Next week, we're going to talk about contentment. And then the last week, we're going to have a living room session with a panel of pastors and guests who are going to help answer questions that you guys will submit anonymously online about anything that you want to talk about. We'll talk about any kind of question. If you want dating advice, if you want help for your marriage, if you want to maximize your single years for Jesus and figure out how to do that, if you have questions about if masturbation's wrong, if you have questions about what are good boundaries in dating, if you're wondering, is having kids a good idea or a bad idea? Should I do it? Anything that you're wondering about, you can ask our panel in a couple weeks. Would you join me before we hop into today's message? I'd love to just pray for a sec. Yeah, God, I pray for the many different experiences in this room when it comes to stages of life, when it comes to experiences of love and purity. And God, you know every single one of our hearts. God, tonight, as I share your word, please, would your spirit just come and rest on this place? Would the enemy have no place to bring hiddenness or shame or guilt? God, would your Spirit comfort us tonight? Would it convict us tonight? God, would we walk away tonight having a better understanding of what your design is for us in whatever season of life we find ourselves in? God, would you give me grace and gentleness as I preach? God, would you just move in powerful ways? You know what people need tonight as they come here. Please do that tonight, Lord. Amen. Amen. Hey, well, my name's Josh. I'm the young adults pastor. If we've never met before, if this is your first time here, I would love to connect afterwards if you're down for it. But my first experience with love when I was younger, I was in grade 6. And that was my first kind of encounter of just having this girl that I was really into. And I was kind of, wheeling her. She went to my church. And mostly it was in my head, but she was really good looking. And I was a hockey player, so naturally high demand, I thought. It actually was when I stopped playing hockey that this all got better. But, I figured I'd shoot my shot one day. So I slid into the Hotmail inbox, and I let her know. I said, hey, just wondering, do your parents let you date? And she promptly replied 6 days later and said, no, I'm actually really focused on my relationship with Jesus, and I'm not interested in a boy right now. So in grade 6, I got swerved for the very first time, and it was a tough experience of love. But here's the good news, is 5 years later, I decided I'd swing back around and try it again. And now 7 years later, I'm still married to that girl, and her name is Janae, and she's my wife. And Janae's smart because she said no to me when she should have. And I was in grade 6, and I was stupid. And she waited for me to meet Jesus for real, and then she came back around. But she still loves Jesus, but she's made some time for me, and I appreciate that. But here's the thing, is Jay and I, we've dated for many years, and we've been engaged, and now we've been married for almost 3 years. And along that time, when we were single, when we were dating, when we were engaged, when we were married, we learned a lot about love and purity. We also realized that there was a lot we didn't know. There's a lot of things that we wish we had known, that we wish someone had told us. And when we looked at the church and we looked at those around us, we went what? Why didn't anyone let us know about this? And so my hope tonight is that whatever season of life you're in, you would have a greater understanding and clarity of what God's design is for that season of life. Because all of us, whatever season we're in, I think God wants to do something in your life right now. And he's going to use your situation to help do that. So I hope that we can walk into that together. What I think many of us maybe don't realize when it comes to the conversation of love and purity is we don't see how much our culture influences what we believe. I've seen this firsthand when I've met with some of my youth boys in my last church, and I would talk with them, and they'd ask me questions. They'd be like, Josh, are you sure divorce is wrong? Are we positive that masturbation's a bad thing? Isn't pornography okay as long as it's with my partner? Are you sure that I can't send nudes to my girlfriend? We're both 16. And I realized that those are legitimate questions, but they reflect not the raising of Christian parents and the church and pastors being the primary voice, but they represent the influence of our culture in our thinking and our sexual ethic. So tonight, whatever questions you have, my hope is that we can answer some of them. And then in the following weeks, my hope is that you will see more clarity around what God's desire would be for you. Now, I want to give you a heads up that we'll try and keep this message quick, but it might be a little bit longer than usual because we have a lot to cover. And because of that, we've also chosen to put some stuff online in the coming days and coming weeks. So later this week, I'd encourage you to hop online, and we're going to put up some videos talking about some of the best books for dating and the best books for marriage. Because here's what I believe. I believe that when you're making some of the biggest decisions of your life, you got to do your research. You got to read. You got to study. And I wish I'd found these books earlier on in my life. But I've read all of them now, and they're amazing. So check out those videos to make sure that you grab a book and help you in whatever season of life you're in. I really believe that they're helpful. So, what's God's design for us? When it comes to being single, when it comes to dating, when it comes to being engaged, when it comes to being married, what is his design for us? Well, we're going to start off with singleness. How many singles we got in the room? Woo, woo. Yeah, okay. A couple of people are proud of it. How many people are just realizing that Valentine's Day is in 5 days and they wish they were still single? All right, 2 people, sweet. All right, hopefully the rest of you are ready. I'm not ready, but the reason I'm not ready is I was really smart. I married a girl with a February 13th birthday. So now I just go for the 2-for-1 special, way cheaper, way smarter. But here's the thing. Lots of us as young adults are single. And many of us, for most of our young adult life, will be single. The average age of marriage now is past 30. So what that means for our generations is that we're going to spend a significant part of our young adult life being single. And it also means that that's going to be 30 to 40% of our total lives. So it's a significant part of our lives. So obviously, marriage is the only thing that matters. How we walk in our singleness matters. So I'm going to unpack today for each of these stages, I think what a very important thing to focus on in that stage of life would be. So I'd encourage you to be taking notes for this. I'd love for you to write this down when it comes to singleness. Singleness, I believe, is heavily about devotion. I believe that one of the most important things to focus on in the season of singleness is devotion. Now, the words that I give you, they're not the only words, but here's how I want you to picture them. I want you to picture them like building blocks. Then each season of life, as you work on this one area, that prepares you to then build into the next. And it doesn't mean that that one goes away, but it's still a foundation that you keep building on. So in singleness, you should focus, I think, heavily on devotion. Devotion to God. Now, what are the influences that we have to fight and the temptations that we have to fight in order to be devoted as singles? Well, I believe that one of the greatest ones that I see in young adults that I meet with when you're single is this sense of being alone. So often I meet single people who believe that because they're single, they're alone. But I don't believe that they have to be the same thing. See, we just finished a series on community in January, and one of the main ideas from that series was that we as the church are meant to be family. Jesus' vision was that we would be family. And here's what I think we've maybe made a mistake as the church, is that if we are family, family includes all people. And for some of you who are single, that hasn't been your experience, and I'm sorry. See, if we are family, you don't need to be married to not be alone. But at any stage of your life, you can find family in this community. So that's one of the reasons why here in Young Adults we'll never do marrieds-only groups. I just don't believe in it. I believe that we are called in any stage of our lives to include people in any stage of our lives. And yes, there's something nice about relating to people in a similar stage, but I believe that our church would be stronger if we did not forget that singles are a part of our family. I want to also acknowledge that being single can be very hard, though. Even though I believe you're not alone, even though I believe that there's hope in the community of the church, it can still be hard. Many of us, we have this longing for a deep and emotional connection with someone. And I think here's where the enemy can start to come in and speak lies into some of us. He can start saying things like, you'll never be happy until you're not single. Or he'll say that you need someone in order to be fulfilled or complete. So can I just remind you, in case any of you have been feeling that spoken into your heart, that that's not true. That's not Jesus' identity for you. God has not made any mistakes having you in the season that you're in. You see, the reason why devotion is so important when we're single is that if we aren't learning to be devoted to God in our singleness, when we start stepping into relationships, it can be harmful. Let me explain. When your identity is rooted in Christ, you can root your identity in others. And that so often happens in young couples. What's also so important to know is that you need to know where your source of life comes from. Where your joy comes from, where your purpose comes from, where your fulfillment will come from. Until you find the right source of life, you can never give life, you can only take life. So when we aren't devoted to Jesus and we start leaving a season of singleness to pursue a relationship, what happens is we do so out of scarcity because we don't know where our life comes from. And when we step into a relationship, we're not looking then to give, but we're looking to take. And what scarcity will do is it will drive desperation. And what desperation then leads to, the desperation of I just want someone who I can cuddle with. The desperation of I just wish I had a girl who could talk to me about the deep longings of my heart because my buddies won't. Or I just wish that I could find someone soon because everyone seems to be pairing up and I'm going to be left with no one, so I have to go now. Desperation will lead us to exploitation. Desperation will lead us to exploitation. Out of a lack of devotion to Jesus, not having him as our source of life, we will turn to others and we will exploit them to find that source of life. And we will expect something from them that they were never meant to give us. Singleness is about learning to have our tanks filled by God so that we can rest in his loving care. Then we can enter into the world as givers and not takers, fountains and not drains. See, love embraced will become love extended. John 4:19, we read this, it says, we love because he first loved us. Have you experienced his love first before you start to try and give love to others? Is that where your love is coming from? Is the motivation for moving to dating or marriage out of a place of extending the love that you've received and embraced? Are you still searching for something that only God was meant to give you? And are you searching for that in another flawed human being? So you might wonder, well, then when would I be ready to start dating? And I think a great filter to use would be to ask yourself this: can I say that Jesus is a greater desire in my life than a relationship? Is Jesus a greater desire in my life than a relationship? If so, then I think you're ready. If not, I would caution you to be careful. Now let me give this encouragement also for seasons of singleness. I think in many ways singleness can be undersold. We can look at relationships and think that's always the next step and I need to rush to that next step. But we read in 1 Corinthians 7, the Apostle Paul, who was single himself for his whole life, he says he wishes more people were single. And the reason why is because when you're in a relationship, your attention becomes divided. And it's not a horrible thing, but it's a reality. See, I experienced this myself. I remember when I was single before I started dating Janae, I was running youth alphas at my school and I was organizing prayer groups and I was praying with buddies, in the mornings, and we'd be reading the Bible on the bus together. Next thing you know, I'm in a relationship and I'm hanging out at Build-A-Bear on December 22nd trying to get a gift for a girl, and I'm like, what am I doing? My attention's become divided. And look, it's great to be married. It's awesome. It's amazing. But so much kingdom work can be accomplished when you're in a single season of life. There's things that just simply are not as easy when you're no longer single. So many of us will only be single for a season of our life. So the encouragement that I have tonight is, would you not rush the single years, but would you give them to God and say, what do you want to do through me in my single years? Maybe God's going to call you to go to another country. You can't do that if you're married and locked down with someone with a job. Maybe God's going to call you to live with certain people and invest in following Jesus with them, and it's going to be this beautiful little frat house thing or whatever you're doing. And maybe that's what God's calling you to do in your single years. Maybe God still wants to work in your heart and do kingdom work in your heart so that in the future he can do greater works through you. Now, some of us will be called to singleness for life, and we should have a very high view of people who make that choice. We actually see in Scripture that singleness, celibacy, is a spiritual gift. People who can actually choose to abstain from sexual intimacy for the sake of the kingdom, it's a gift. It's beautiful, and we should celebrate it. But I also know that some of us will be single for a long time without our choosing. And my hope is that tonight, if you feel that way, if you have that fear, would you bring it before God and ask him, what do you want to do in my heart, God? So in your years of being single, could I encourage you? Would you not chase after boys and girls or just stare at screens trying to please yourself or hang out on the couch and binge watch Grey's Anatomy while eating ice cream and Doritos. But would you ask God, what do you want to do with me in this season? What is the calling that you have for my life? Now, if you're in a healthy relationship with God, I believe that you'd be ready for the next season. And the next season is called dating. So what's dating look like? What's God's design for us when we date? Well, I believe that dating is primarily about evaluation. See, the purpose of dating, it's not actually something we see a lot in scriptures. The purpose of dating is to find someone to marry. So therefore, dating is for evaluating who we want to marry. But something that I'm seeing shift in culture that I think, need to recapture in the church is that the purpose of dating isn't to have fun or to have friends with benefits or to just have someone to chill. It's really not supposed to be a status, but it's supposed to be a season of evaluation. We're supposed to be intentionally looking for a partner for marriage, not just for someone to make us happy or to have fun with, but for a partner for marriage. And often it's the extended season of just hanging out with someone because it's fun that will get us into trouble. So would you view dating as a very intentional time to evaluate? So how do we evaluate? Well, I think oftentimes we can start thinking about evaluation by making our grocery list, I call it. I want them to be this tall, and I hope that they have brown hair, and they better have a good job, and they better be well educated, and they better love Jesus, and they better be respectful to me, and they better be really good with their money, but not too much so they still spoil me. And we get this list going. And what scares me sometimes when I hear the list, when someone gives me their list, is that we have to be really cautious that we're not looking for a product, but that we're looking for a person. We have to be really careful that we're not trying to become consumers, but that we recognize that we're meant to be companions. So what's the issue with consuming? And I think we can consume in many ways without even being aware of it. Well, I see 4 distinct issues with consuming. The first one is that consuming, having a consumer mindset, drives unrealistic expectations. Especially when it comes to social media and watching shows, and what we often do, and especially I think girls can struggle with this, is they can grab the parts of what they've seen online and they can build into this persona of a person that's not real. They don't exist, I'm sorry. So we have these unrealistic expectations that aren't healthy. I even saw this once with a buddy who was like, yeah, I wish she was more like this and like that, and I wish she would do this and that, and he's building out this reason of why she wasn't right for him, and I was like, dude, you don't do any of that stuff. What are you talking about? And I love how Andy Stanley put it once. He said, are you the person you're looking for is looking for? Are you the person you're looking for is looking for? Oftentimes we build a expectation list that we would never meet ourselves. Are you the person you're looking for is looking for? The other issue with consuming is that studies show that we just don't know what we want. So when we build the shopping list, it's going to be wrong. Match.com, who they own Tinder and Plenty of Fish and a bunch of other, dating sites, what they've seen over time is they've started to move towards just having, say, a picture and a brief bio. They used to have all these filters and all these kind of options that you could choose, but what they realized was that people never stuck with what they said. They'd often find something outside of what they said they'd like. I experienced this myself. I always thought that I'd marry this super competitive, athletic girl, and I ended up marrying an Enneagram 9 who cares for the elderly and is the most gentle, loving person I know. And I'm stoked about it. But I had no idea what I wanted. The third issue that comes with consuming is that we often focus heavily on the things that change. So we end up basing the permanent on the transient. Proverbs 31:30 puts it this way. It says, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. So when we evaluate, are we focusing on things that last or things that change? And lastly, it's really dehumanizing when we consume. Again, do we want a product or a person? Honestly, it breaks my heart when I think about our current sexual moment because it's so dehumanized. It's animalistic. The idea that you don't even have to flirt with someone or woo someone or impress someone or do anything for someone, but if you're horny, you can just bring out an app and you can get off as quick as if you were watching pornography. We're treating each other like sex toys. It's sad. It's dehumanizing. And you might say, well, Josh, I'm good because I'm in a nice Christian relationship and we don't use Tinder and we're good. But I've seen so many relationships in the church in non-sexual ways become consumers. where instead of dating and marriage being seen as a way to give and serve and love and invest, we selfishly use it to fulfill our own desires. And when we receive, we often do so only looking for our own heart. I love this study that I remember learning about in one of my psych courses. And what they did in this study was they gave two groups of people $100 bills. And one group of people was told you can go spend it on whatever you want. And the other group was told you have to give it away somehow. So whether that's through giving really nice, generous tips, or whether that was buying someone a gift, or whether it was buying people food, or whatever it was, you had to give it away. And guess what the research came back and found? That the people who were most fulfilled and joyful and happy after the experiment were the people who gave it away. Why? Because we have been wired not to be takers, but to be givers. So when we become consumers, which is everything our culture is about, right? Like, I hope she doesn't text the next day. I hope she doesn't catch feelings. It's consuming. And what's sad about that is the very thing we want is actually being missed, because we'll get what we want when we give, not when we take. So are you a consumer? So if you're not consuming, then what should you be looking for when it comes to evaluating someone in your dating years? Well, there's two things. You should be looking for character and chemistry. Essentially, does this person love Jesus? Are they a woman or a man of integrity? Are they trustworthy? Are they loving? And do you have good chemistry? And chemistry, it really matters. For example, do you have a compatible worldview? If you're a Christian and they're not, it's going to be incredibly hard to raise children or to decide on the most important things of life together, to choose careers, to have a common purpose. Do you have a compatible worldview? Socially, are you compatible? Do you like hanging out? Do you like each other actually socially? Do you like each other's friends? You know, one of the reasons why it's so important to abstain sexually in a relationship is that it's really hard to evaluate if you like someone as a friend and socially when you're involved sexually. Like, let's be honest, most of us would probably like someone if we're fooling around with them. So if we want to discover, actually, do I like you as a friend, then we have to abstain sexually. Bless you. No worries, bro. The other thing that we have to consider is, are we compatible when it comes to our careers? Something that sometimes I've seen couples catch maybe a little bit late, maybe after they've been engaged, is that their careers aren't compatible. For example, if one of you wants to be a traveling YouTuber and the other person wants to settle down and work in a shop and have a half-acre lot, that's not going to work well. Have you had those conversations? Are you compatible with your careers? And lastly, are you compatible physically? It shouldn't be the most important thing, but it matters. Do you like them? Do you find them cute? Do you find them attractive? And all of this is so important to ensure that you're compatible in all these areas. Because if I can be honest with you as a married person, most of your married life is not spent fooling around. I know a lot of young couples that think, well, I'll just get married and we got to be compatible sexually and whatever. Most of your time is spent talking, doing chores, hanging out with friends, seeing each other's families, and just doing life together. So do you like them as a friend? I think this is why it's so important to build that foundation of friendship first. My encouragement would be, instead of trying to find strangers online, and I understand that sometimes that's just where we're at as a culture, but can I encourage you, would you look first to your community? And now, at the same time, would you not be that person who dates every single person in your young adult group? We all know that person, and it's like, okay, stop. And if you don't know that person, I'm sorry, you are that person. So, here's an analogy that you might find helpful when it comes to dating. When I was in Edmonton, I got to run the Edmonton Marathon a few times, and when you run the Edmonton Marathon, there's a 5-kilometer, a 10-kilometer, a half marathon, and a full marathon race all at once. And throughout the race, you have these moments where you're running next to the same person for a while. And you're like, oh, hey, what's up? We're running at the same pace, and then all of a sudden they ditch you. And you're like, what? And it turns out that they're running a different race. There's different turnoffs for people finishing a different place. There's different roadmaps, there's different destinations, there's different goals in mind. So what you want to be careful with, they say when you're training for a marathon, is you don't want to become buddies too quickly and then lose your pace partner. You want to figure out who's running the same race as me so that we can go together, and then after a while we can start chatting, we can be friends for the last 2 kilometers when we hate ourselves. And I think when it comes to dating, what some of us do is that we too quickly, 2 kilometers into the race, we start looking and going, okay, who wants to pair up? But we don't know yet where their destination is. We don't know yet where they're going. And I think what's really helpful is to wait and to go, who's running in the same direction as me? and to focus instead, especially at the start, on running your race. Don't be trying to find someone, just run your race. And what's going to happen? Eventually, you're going to recognize, oh, wow, this person's been next to me for like an hour and a half. We're going in the same place. We're going in the same direction. Janae and I, we met this way. We were serving in the church together. We were coming early to set up for youth group. And I was like, oh, hey, you're kind of cute. Make sure I'm next to you in prayer group for that laying of hands thing. And, oh, that's weird. Sorry. That's weird. On the shoulder. But also, there's something beautiful about serving next to someone because you see their heart. And you can better see what kind of person they are. I loved, Janae and I, we got to serve in kids ministry together for a couple years. And it was really fun because we got to see how each other were with kids, which is really important. And also really helpful to make a girl like you when they see you with kids, I found out. So it's really great to serve next to your partner. So I think it's really important that we focus on running our race, and then we look for the person that's running the same race next to us. I think that saves us a lot of hurt in the future. Okay, so if you've built your foundation on devotion to God in your single and your dating years, and then if you've spent your dating years evaluating and not being a consumer and not having unhealthy motives, then what would be the stage of engagement all about? Well, here's what engagement's about, is it's focused heavily on moving from a single person to a union, moving to a partnership, meaning becoming one. It's really meant to be a time where you focus on the complexities of bringing two lives together. It's not easy. An important reminder that I also give to anyone in this season of life is to make sure that you, in all that complexity, spend more time focusing on your marriage than on your wedding. Weddings, they can be really busy. They can be a lot to plan, but it's just one day. It's better to have a messed up wedding than a messed up life. Now, the biggest question that many people have about this season is, how would I know that I'm ready? How do I know that I'm ready to be engaged? Well, I've got 4 things that I encourage you to look for before you get engaged. The first would be a strong sense of commitment. And how do you know if you're committed? Well, have you fought? If you've never fought, then you're not ready, please. Have you explored your family's values? Janae and I, we grew up in very similar families. Yet still, there was tension as we tried to sort out the right way to load the dishwasher. So you got to figure out, hey, are we compatible and ready here? Are we committed to deal with each other, doing life differently? So do you have a growing sense of commitment? Have you seen each other in a variety of circumstances? Not just in the good times, but also in the hard times. Have you been through some seasons of life together? Are you committed? The second thing is there a growing skill of communication? I think a great way to test this, and often you could ask maybe someone to watch you in this situation and tell you, is when you fight, are you fighting more so to be right and to win, or to find a solution and to both win? Oftentimes when couples fight, it's one versus the other. But what we have to remember is that the other person is not the enemy. Actually, the enemy is the person that's trying to divide your marriage. So you need to be on the same team and fight them. So Janae and I, when we fight, which we did this weekend, which was great when I'm preaching on this, but we make sure we hold hands to remind ourselves, hey, we are on the same team, even though you're wrong and I'm frustrated. No, I'm kidding. Oh, I just said it, hey. Even though we're both wrong, I'm probably wrong, we're on the same team. And that's so important. Do you have a growing skill of communication? The third thing is, have you survived a moment of confession? Have you actually seen the person in their weakness, in their brokenness? Have you been willing to be real and broken with them? Now, don't do this on the first date and go, here's my life, that's too much. But also, don't wait until the wedding night to be like, hey, by the way, here's all my junk. Find somewhere appropriate in the middle to go, hey, look, here's who I am. In my brokenness, maybe you've made mistakes in the past, maybe you've got stuff that you're not proud of. You got to be real at some point about that. And that helps both you and the other person evaluate, is this going to work? Are we a good fit for each other? Oftentimes, I think in these moments, I've seen couples experience incredible grace that grows them closer together as they recognize, wow, that person trusts me enough to be real with the most dark and brutal part of their life. And it's awesome, but it's hard. The fourth thing to look for before you get engaged is, do you have the support of your community? And what I would also add on to this is that when you're dating, do not date alone. Do not date in isolation. It's so unhealthy. It's so sad what can often happen when people make that choice. Would you date in community? Would you date in maybe relationship with each other's families if that's normal? Would you be a part of other people's lives when you're dating so that when you start going, I wonder if this is the person, there's people who can say, yeah, I can affirm that's a good decision. If you don't have the support of spiritual leaders in your life, of each other's families, of friends that you trust and care about, could I caution you, would you trust them? Oftentimes on the outside, people can see your relationship much better than maybe you can on the inside. So if you don't have the thumbs up from people that you care about, could I caution you? So those are the 4 things that I recommend you look at before you get engaged. So again, engagement, it's about moving from a single life to a life of union. And I think here's another thing that comes in this season is you're moving from a life of selfishness to a life of servitude. You know, I remember as Jane and I moved closer to being married, I started to realize, I can't hang out till 2 a.m. with the boys whenever I want. I started to realize I can't just go drop $1,000 on a new pair of skis without asking her. You start to realize that I'm no longer my own boss. And it's not just about me. It's moving from selfishness to servitude. And don't believe the lies of the culture, that you're whipped or that you're a slave or anything stupid like that. It's actually that you're growing up and that you're realizing life's not just about you. And that really there's a beauty in sacrificing your immediate desires for what's best for another person. So engagement's a season of changing habits, and it's hard, and it will take time, and I'm still in it. But would you ask yourself, what do I need to change in my single years as I move towards marriage? In that engagement season, what's the habits that you need to let go of so that you can truly be a union? There's a lot of married couples that still live like they're single, and I think it really hurts their marriage. Would we change our habits? 3 quick things to consider in engagement, 3 F's for you. Family, finances, and future. Would you make sure you talk through all 3? Would you talk through your families, your values, what your family is going to look like? Would you make sure that you figure out your finances? I know couples who, they want to get married, but they're so not ready financially. And the biggest stress in marriage is money. So would you not enter into a marriage not being ready financially? And it doesn't mean you have to have loads of money, but it means have you at least counted the cost? Has there been some wisdom in deciding, is this a good decision? Can we actually afford rent? Are we sure we're ready for this? Also make sure that in your season of engagement that you spend some time together figuring out each other's money. If each other have debt, do not hide that. And make sure that you go through some sort of course, whether it's a Dave Ramsey course or we're going to start offering a young adult money course here that I think would be really wise to make sure that you're stepping into marriage prepared financially. And lastly, make sure that you've talked through your future. Do you know your career ambitions? Are they compatible? Do you know what you want to do? How many kids you want to have if you want to have kids? Do you know what's coming? Have you talked through family vacations? Have you talked through your dreams of what life could look like, where you want to live, what kind of house you want to be in? All that stuff really matters in that season of engagement. All right. So after singleness, and then after dating, and then after engagement, we move to marriage. And that's where we're going to end tonight. So what's marriage all about? Well, marriage is designed for sanctification. I love how Tim Keller puts it. He says, marriage is not about becoming happy, it's about becoming holy. And how many married people in the room know that sometimes becoming holy isn't always the most fun? It can be hard. But here's the idea. In marriage, you walk in deep intimacy and vulnerability with someone. And because of that, you have the opportunity for iron to truly sharpen iron. Meaning that you, with grace, can bring truth to your partner in a way that almost no one else can. You know, what I love about marriage is that someone knows you so deeply that the way that they bring correction into your life, which is needed for sanctification, for becoming more like Jesus, for growing in our faith, the way that they can do that is with such grace because they know you for who you really are. They know your insecurities and your brokenness. You know, Janae and I, we experience this a lot, mostly me, when, for example, we're driving home. And we'll have been hanging out with some friends and having fun, and we'll be driving home, and she'll look at me and be like, why'd you say that? I'm like, what? What do you mean, what did I say? She's like, why'd you say that? I'm like, said what? And then insert the dumb opinion I shared that day. She'd be like, I think you really hurt someone when you said that. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that. But the great thing is that when Janae does that, she's not sarcastic, she's not passive aggressive, she's not being mean, but she's going, Josh, I know your heart. I know you didn't want to hurt that person, but what you did hurt them. So would you not do that again? And she helps grow me because she loves me. And that's what is so amazing about marriage, is we help to make each other more holy, to be more like God. Now, at the same time, sometimes people go, well, if marriage is about holiness, not happiness, then is that just why no one seems to be happy in their marriage? Not at all. Actually, most people are really happy in their marriage, I think. A lot of people have really great marriages. It's so fun. It brings so much joy. But here's what we need to get right, is that happiness is the byproduct of holiness. When we are longing after God and we are growing closer to God and our hearts are set on his desires, that actually brings true happiness, true joy, true fulfillment. Now, one of the reasons that marriage makes us holy is because it's a picture of Christ and the church. Christ is the head of the church. Christ died for the church. The church submits to Christ. There's love, there's sacrifice, there's service, there's submission, and it's beautiful. And that's what marriage should look like too. You know, Paul in Ephesians 5, it's one of the core texts on marriage. So when we're asking the question, what is God's design for marriage? What kind of design do we need to be fighting for? It's this. It says in Ephesians 5, 22, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body of which he is the Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives submit to your husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church, and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Now some of you might hear a passage like that and go, oh, I don't know if I liked all those words. But here's what's sad. In our brokenness, we have lost the beauty of this passage. This text is God's design for marriage. So here's what we need to get right so that this isn't a controversial or contentious piece of scripture. So let me address what this is and isn't saying. It's saying, yes, wives are to submit to their husbands, but that does not mean that wives are lesser or not equal. Jesus was one with the Father, but also submitted to the Father. I think following Jesus' example is a great place to be. Also, this is in marriage. This is not at all a text to say that somehow women submit to men in the context of a church or a community group or in a workplace. Not at all. This is within a household because the man is meant to be the spiritual leader of the household, of his wife and his kids. So do not abuse this passage beyond what it was meant for. Also, I want to speak to the men for a second. You know what makes submission really hard, guys? Ungodly, lazy, immature men who don't follow Jesus, who don't sacrifice for their wives, who don't serve their families, who don't want to give up their own boyish desires to be a real father. See, submission is meant to be beautiful, but it's really hard to submit to someone that you don't want to follow. So men, the reason this text in our culture is contentious is our fault. We've screwed this up. We're not the spiritual leaders in the households. So many marriages I look at, the wife loves Jesus, the guy, I don't know, drives the car to church. The call for us men is to be the spiritual leaders, to present our wives to Jesus, holy and blameless because we've discipled them, because we love them. And our kids, how are you going to raise kids and teach them to follow Jesus when you aren't in your own Bible, when you aren't praying, when you don't actually have a relationship with Jesus? No wonder wives don't want to submit to husbands anymore. We're not worth it. But Jesus' desire is that men, we would be worth following in our households. You know, in Janae's and my marriage, we're not always perfect at this. But what we've come to see is that I understand that my calling is to be responsible for the choices of our family. So when we make a decision together, Janae says, here are my thoughts. And men, always include your wife. This is not a call for you to make every decision and to ignore her. Always include the wisdom of your wife. But she gives me her thoughts, and then I'm left going, okay, what is the decision that God's called us to? And as the leader, as the head, just like Jesus is the head of the church, the man is supposed to make the decision there. And wives, I know this can be a really hard text at times, so I'm sorry. But the call is that you would submit to your husband out of respect for his spiritual leadership that Christ has designed it to be this way. So would we know that this is God's design? Would we be worth following men? Last thing on marriage. Marriage is about mission. The purpose of marriage is not just to be happy and to have fun together. It's to be made holy, and it's for mission. Here's what's great about mission, is that you're never going to grow closer with someone than when you're on mission together. I'm sure many of you have experienced that, being maybe on a missions trip or accomplishing a great task alongside friends. It grows you close. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Are we having a mission in our marriages? We see Priscilla and Aquila in Scripture. They're a couple who, when Paul was being persecuted as an apostle planting churches, they brought him in and they cared for him and they resourced him and they equipped him. They lived life on mission together. So would you, if you're married right now, would you, on the drive home, just ask that question to each other? What's our mission together? You know, I've seen a couple before who had incredible mission in their marriage. Their names were Barry and Denise. And Barry, over the years, he made very good money in his work. They were able as a couple to be incredibly generous. They had dozens of people live with them over the years who couldn't afford to maybe pay rent on their own or who just needed someone to love and care for them. Denise, she was a leader in our youth ministry, and then she works now at a Bible college, and she invests in so many relationships with young people. They are living life on mission. They have changed so many people's lives. And Janae and I look at that and just go, we want that to be the story of our marriage. We want a marriage with mission. So would you know that God has designed marriage to be a place where you can live on mission together? So there it is. Singleness, dating, engagement, marriage. What's God's design for them? It's that we'd be devoted to him. And after we figure that out, that then we'd focus on evaluation. After that, we'd focus on becoming one, union. After that, we'd focus on becoming holy and on mission. So do you understand God's design for love and purity? My hope is that this has been a helpful talk. My hope is that in a couple of weeks when we do Q&R, question and response, that you can ask some more questions to clarify things. But this is what God is calling us to. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up, and I'll ask all of you to stand with me now, and we'll close like this. Thanks for making it through it. I know that was longer than usual. Here's my heart for us as young adults. In Timothy, in 1 Timothy, we read the Apostle Paul. He says this to his protege. He says, Timothy, don't let anyone look down on you because you're young, but set an example for believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Here's my heart for this community. Would we, no matter if you're 17, no matter if you're past 30, would we, as young believers, set an example for the church in our love and in our purity? Would we not settle for the bar and the standard of our culture, but would we pursue God's design for singleness, for dating, for engagement, for marriage, please? Will we step into what God's design is because he made it and he knows what's best for us? You know, tonight, I know that this can sometimes be a hard talk to hear for different people for various reasons. So this is how I want to end off tonight. In 1 Corinthians 6:9, this is what Paul says. He says, the sexually immoral will not inherit the kingdom of God, and such were some of you. But you were washed, you were sanctified, and you were justified in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and by the Spirit of God. So can I encourage you tonight? If throughout this talk you had this sense of shame or of guilt because of decisions that you've made in the past or decisions you're currently making, would you know that we have a God who wants to wash you, who wants to cleanse you, who wants to justify you? He doesn't want to leave you where you're at. He doesn't want you to stay hidden. He doesn't want you to be in bondage to addictions, to thoughts in your mind, to unhealthy relationships that you're not supposed to be in. He wants to set people free. He wants to bring healing and forgiveness. This isn't an angry Father. This is a loving Father. So tonight, We're going to have the prayer team over there as usual. We're going to have a couple songs for worship. But I really think tonight that would be so important for so many of us to go receive prayer. Maybe even in your seats you want to pray with your friends and receive prayer for maybe your heartache over your singleness. Or maybe your insecurity in your dating relationship. Or maybe the impurity in your dating relationship. Maybe as a couple you say, we need to go get prayer together. Maybe you're in a marriage right now and it's not in a good spot. Maybe you're battling with lust, you're battling with porn, you're doing things that you don't think you could ever tell someone. Could I encourage you that there is freedom on the other side of confession? Do not walk away tonight with hiddenness and secrecy, please. We all have mess. I'm going over there to get prayer myself. We all need it. Would you take some time to just go before Jesus and say, Jesus, what's your design for my season of life right now? Would I step into it? Let's worship together.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you found this valuable, would you consider sharing with a friend that you think might benefit from it? Also, we'd love if you subscribed if you haven't yet, and leave a comment down below of any thoughts, of any questions that you had on this teaching, on this discussion, and we answer every single one of those. If you're looking for any more information on Sanctus Young Adults, you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on our website. We hope you have a great rest of your day.